We have seen heuristics. Heuristics are these mental shortcuts that we use to make a decision. We can use heuristics to influence other people. However, to do so, we need to know, when do people rely on heuristics? And are there factors that influence what we do? If you have no idea what heuristics are, it is probably better to watch the videos in the link first. I am Kees Keizer, assistant professor and consultant in the field of influence and persuasion. To answer the question, when do we use heuristics? Two models provide an answer. These models are referred to as dual process models, and they are often used in persuasion research. These are: number one, the elaboration likelihood model, and number two, the heuristic systematic model. The models are very similar in their approach of persuasion and differ mainly in the terms being used. In this video, I will focus specifically on the elaboration likelihood model. The elaboration likelihood model is developed in the 1980s by Richard Petty and John Cacioppo. Now, the model tries to explain how a persuasive message may result in the end in an attitude change, and after that, behavior. It suggests that the extent to which we elaborate on a specific persuasive message varies on a continuum from no or very low elaboration to high. When a message is highly elaborated, persuasion will take what the model refers to as the central root. For the central root, the message content, the quality of the arguments, is key, as these will be thoroughly thought about, weighed, reflected on. When elaboration is very low, persuasion follows the peripheral route. Here we rely on heuristics, and it is, for example, more the appearance of the person presenting the arguments, or the number of arguments, rather than the content determining persuasion. I hear you saying, but what about if elaboration is somewhere in the middle, so not very high and not very low? Good question. It is said and criticized that you then use a combination of both, so both peripheral and central processing. Now, in order to become masters of influence, our next question should be: what determines the level of elaboration in which we approach a persuasive message, and thus via which route persuasion takes place, central or peripheral? The answer to that is there are two main factors: our ability to elaborate a persuasive message and our motivation to do so. Our motivation to elaborate in turn is influenced by our involvement in the topic at hand. If a persuasive message concerns a topic that we're highly interested in, we are so much more likely to elaborate on it. For example, if you're highly into small wooden sailors, then any persuasive message regarding the wood of these beauties will be met with a thorough weighing of the arguments. It's maybe a bit of a weird example. Okay, putting away the small wooden sailor. Another factor that is influencing our motivation to elaborate is personal relevance. If you are a student and you encounter a persuasive message regarding student loans and the interest on that, then it's so much more likely that you will central process that message than somebody who isn't a student. The third factor influencing your motivation to elaborate is simply whether you enjoy thinking hard about stuff. This is also referred to as your need for cognition. If you are the person that even tries to analyze an episode of The Kardashians for political meaning, or you try to start a debate at the morning table about the statements made on the cereal box, you're probably a person that has a high need for cognition. The extent to which we elaborate a persuasive message not only relies on our motivation to do so, but also on our ability. And that ability to elaborate in turn relies on, for example, our knowledge of the topic and the complexity of the topic being presented. Most messages concerning cell mutations in koalas I tend to tackle with the heuristic route rather than the central one. For example, is the person presenting the arguments wearing a lab coat, yes or no? Let's assume that you're very knowledgeable on this specific topic, then it's still not a given that you will rely on the central route. For example, distractions can really hamper your ability to elaborate. The same holds for when you're very tired, mentally fatigued, or the persuasive message is only there for a very brief moment and there is no repetition. This all will hamper your ability to actually elaborate the message and thus take the central route. Your emotions can also influence your ability to elaborate. Now that is a topic we will discuss when talking about how you can use emotions to actually influence people. Stay tuned for that. Of all these factors, time and, for example, repetition are sometimes labeled as opportunity rather than ability. So a third factor, so to say. If you're crafting a influence attempt, you can actually steer via which route your persuasive message is processed by the time of day you present that message to your audience. If this is early in the morning when people are sharp, or late at night when most of us are mentally fatigued, and this would take the peripheral route of processing that message. So you can steer via which route your persuasive message is processed. But which route should you aim for? Central or peripheral? Research seems to indicate that persuasion via the peripheral route has a shorter life. And it is also less resistant to influence attempts afterwards. Does that mean that you should aim for the central route? Now, it's not that simple. If you have very strong and understandable arguments in your message, I would say go ahead, go central, go. However, if that is not the case, then the central route might not be the wisest. If you have weak arguments, then people thinking hard about these weak arguments when they take the central route is probably not that wise. They would reach an opposite opinion than what you actually try to influence them. So in that case, aiming for that peripheral route would be your better option. The same holds when you have a crowd with an opposite opinion than the one you're trying to sell, and if they have quite okay arguments for that opinion. Now, if you aim for the central route in this specific case, then these people might think hard about not only the arguments presented, but their counter arguments, and end up being actually more convinced of their own opinion than at forehand. In this case, it might be a better option to go for that peripheral route, where there is not a lot of elaboration. Also, sometimes there are situations where you don't control all factors. For example, if you are given the opportunity to actually place a billboard on a fun fair next to a roller coaster, that would not be the ideal situation to actually post your billboard with the then very strong arguments why people shouldn't eat meat. That specific setting calls for a peripheral type of message, so using heuristics, that would be a better fit. So always go for the good fit with the situation rather than always going for central processing. In sum, when do we rely on heuristics? The answer: when we engage in peripheral processing. Now, and whether we do is influenced by our ability and our motivation to elaborate. These two factors are in turn influenced by various other factors which we discussed, and knowing them can help you construct great and promising influence attempts. Enjoy.